Captain Sarah Chen had seen her share of space debris during 15 years hauling cargo between the outer colonies, but nothing quite like this. The massive object drifted silently against the star-speckled void, its surface so black it seemed to swallow light itself. Her ship's sensors struggled to get clear readings, as if the thing was made of materials that didn't want to be detected. "What do you make of it, Zara?" Sarah asked her AI companion, unwrapping a cherry-flavored sugar stick as she studied the readings. "Unknown composition, Captain. The object measures approximately 2 kilometers in length, showing no energy signatures, no life signs, and no response to standard communication protocols. Age estimates suggest it has been drifting here for roughly 2,000 years, give or take a few centuries." Sarah bit down on the candy stick, the sweet artificial flavor helping her think. The object wasn't on any star charts, wasn't registered as a derelict, and certainly wasn't anything built by human hands. Its design defied easy description, flowing curves that seemed almost organic, yet with geometric precision that spoke of advanced engineering. Strange symbols were etched into its hull, symbols that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than human eyes could properly process. "Any idea what species built it?" Sarah asked, maneuvering her salvage ship closer. In her line of work, finding something this old and obviously alien could mean early retirement if she played her cards right. The Galactic collectors paid enormous sums for genuine pre-contact artifacts. Negative. The design doesn't match any known alien architecture in the databases. This predates first contact with the Zenthari by at least 1,800 years. Captain, I should note that several deep space sensors have detected this object over the centuries, but no one has attempted close examination. Most ships reported equipment malfunctions when they tried to approach. That should have been Sarah's cue to back away. Any reasonable person would have marked the coordinates and reported the find to the authorities. But Sarah had never been accused of being reasonable. She'd grown up on the hardscrabble mining colonies, where you either found ways to make the impossible work or you died trying. Her ship, the Perseverance, was a testament to that philosophy. A patched-together collection of salvaged parts that somehow kept flying despite having no right to. "Take us in closer. Match the object's drift velocity and bring us alongside. I want to get a look at those markings." "Captain, I must advise caution. The energy-dampening field around this vessel is unlike anything in my databases. It's possible that—" "Noted and logged," Sarah interrupted, already reaching for her EVA suit. "But we didn't come this far to turn around because of a maybe." 20 minutes later, Sarah was floating in the void beside the alien vessel, her suit's lights playing across its surface. Up close, the symbols were even more disturbing. They seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them, and her suit's cameras couldn't seem to focus on them properly. But there was something else. A section of the hull that looked different from the rest, smoother somehow, as if it might be an access panel. Sarah pulled herself closer, running her gloved hands over the surface. There was definitely something there. A slight depression in the perfect smoothness, roughly circular and about the size of her palm. In the center was a small hole, perhaps a centimeter in diameter. "Zara, are you getting this? It looks like some kind of interface or access port." "Confirmed, Captain. However, I'm detecting no power sources within the vessel. Whatever systems this might connect to appear to have been dormant for millennia." Sarah frowned, floating there in the cosmic silence. The candy stick was still in her mouth. She'd forgotten about it while suiting up. Out of habit more than anything else. She bit down again, and a small piece broke off. Without thinking, she pulled the remainder from her mouth to examine it. The candy stick was about the right diameter for the hole. "You've got to be kidding me," Sarah muttered, looking from the innocent confection to the alien access port. It was ridiculous, absurd, the kind of coincidence that made her laugh at how strange the universe could be. But Sarah had always believed that sometimes the universe handed you exactly what you needed, even if it came in the most unlikely packages. And she'd learned long ago that the simplest solutions were often the right ones. "Captain, what are you considering?" Zara's voice carried a note of concern that her programmers had never intended. "Just testing a theory," Sarah said, positioning the candy stick over the hole. "What's the worst that could happen?" She slid the sugar stick into the opening. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the vessel began to wake up. It started as a low vibration that Sarah felt through her suit's contact with the hull. Then lights began to flicker to life along the strange symbols, revealing that they weren't etched into the surface at all, but were some kind of advanced display system. The lights spread outward from the access point in rippling patterns, like digital water flowing across the hull. "Captain!" Zara's voice was sharp with urgency. "I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the vessel. Whatever you just did, it's bringing systems online that have been dormant for 2,000 years. Sarah should have pulled back, should have extracted the candy stick and gotten as far away as possible. Instead, she found herself fascinated by the patterns of light spreading across the alien hull. They were beautiful, hypnotic even, and somehow she understood that they weren't random. There was meaning in the patterns, a kind of language written in light and mathematics. The vessel shuddered, ancient drives coming online with the groan of metal that had been cold for centuries. Sarah grabbed a handhold as the massive ship began to turn, orienting itself with purpose for the first time in 2 millennia. Across its surface, ports began to open, revealing chambers filled with soft, welcoming light. "Captain, you need to return to the ship immediately. The vessel is powering up what appear to be weapons systems." But Sarah wasn't afraid. Somehow she knew the lights weren't hostile. The patterns were trying to tell her something. And with growing amazement, she began to understand what it was. The vessel wasn't a ship at all. It was a message, a test, a cosmic examination left by a species so advanced they had transcended physical existence long before humans had even discovered fire. They had seeded the galaxy with these vessels, waiting for a species clever enough and brave enough to find the simple solution to an impossibly complex problem. And humans, with their stubborn refusal to accept that anything was impossible, had just passed the test with a piece of candy. The access port began to glow brighter, and Sarah realized the candy stick was dissolving, being absorbed by the alien technology. But it wasn't being destroyed. It was being analyzed, cataloged, understood. The vessel was learning about humanity through something as simple as artificial cherry flavoring and crystallized sugar. A new section of hull opened near Sarah's position, revealing what was unmistakably an airlock. The patterns of light seemed to be beckoning her inside, promising answers to questions humanity had been asking since they first looked up at the stars. Sarah keyed her comm system. "Zara, prepare the ship for extended EVA operations. I think we're about to make first contact." "With a vessel that's been dead for 2,000 years? "Not dead," Sarah corrected, watching the lights dance across the alien hull in ever more complex patterns. "Waiting. It's been waiting for someone stupid enough to try feeding it candy." As she pulled herself toward the opening airlock, Sarah couldn't help but smile. "Leave it to humanity to solve an ancient cosmic puzzle with processed sugar and food coloring. Some species built monuments to their greatness. Others transcended physical reality through pure thought. Humans? Humans carried snacks." The airlock sealed behind Sarah with a soft hiss that spoke of technology so advanced it made human engineering look like stone tools. The atmosphere read as perfectly breathable, which should have been impossible given that the vessel had been drifting in vacuum for 2 millennia. Yet here she was, removing her helmet and breathing air that tasted faintly of ozone and something else. Something that reminded her of the moment right before a thunderstorm. The interior corridor stretched ahead of her, walls covered in the same flowing symbols that had adorned the exterior. But now they were moving, shifting and changing in response to her presence. As Sarah walked forward, the symbols began to simplify, becoming more geometric, more familiar. "Zara, are you recording this?" Sarah sub-vocalized into her comm unit. "Affirmative, Captain. However, I'm having difficulty processing the visual data. The symbols appear to be adapting themselves in real time. It's as if the ship is trying to communicate in a language we can understand." Sarah paused at what appeared to be an intersection of 3 corridors. The moment she stopped, the symbols on the walls froze, then began to reorganize themselves into something that made her breath catch in her throat. Mathematical equations. Basic at first, 2 plus 2 equals 4, then growing more complex. Physics formulas she recognized from her academy days. The universal constant of gravity. The speed of light in vacuum. "It's teaching itself to talk to us," Sarah whispered. "Using math as a common language." A soft chime echoed through the corridor, and one of the passages began to glow more brightly than the others. Sarah followed the light, her boots making no sound on the strange material that felt like metal, but yielded slightly under her weight, as if the ship was adjusting its density to make walking more comfortable. The passage opened into a vast chamber that took Sarah's breath away. It was a library. Not like any human library, with books and data storage devices, but something far more elegant. Crystalline structures hung in the air, each one containing what appeared to be compressed light. As Sarah approached one of them, it began to pulse with gentle radiance, and suddenly her mind was filled with images. A species unlike anything in human xenobiology databases. They stood 3 meters tall, with elongated limbs and faces that seemed to shift between expressions of profound wisdom and infinite sadness. Their civilization had spanned millions of years, growing from primitive tool users to beings who could manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level. But with that advancement had come a terrible realization. The universe was dying. Not just their local cluster of stars, but everything. Reality itself was running down like a clock whose spring had finally unwound. They had perhaps 10,000 years before the last star guttered out and existence collapsed back into primordial nothingness. But they had discovered something else, something that gave them hope. Throughout the galaxy, they had found evidence of other species who possessed something their own people had lost in their ascension to higher consciousness: the ability to find simple solutions to impossible problems, the willingness to try things that shouldn't work, the stubborn refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. They called it the spark, that combination of creativity, stubbornness, and blind optimism that could sometimes achieve what pure logic declared unreachable. Their own species had refined themselves beyond such primitive thinking patterns. They had become perfect beings of pure intellect, and that perfection had become their limitation. Sarah stepped back from the crystal, her mind reeling. They transcended their physical forms, but they lost something essential in the process. They became too logical, too perfect to solve certain kinds of problems. More crystals began to glow as she moved through the chamber. Each one contained fragments of the story. How the architects, as they called themselves, had built 1,000 vessels like this one and sent them drifting through the galaxy. Each vessel contained their entire knowledge base, their technology, their history. But more than that, each was a test. The test was simple in concept, impossible in execution. To activate the vessel, one needed to provide it with something that couldn't exist. The interface port wasn't designed for any tool or key. It was designed to accept something that violated the basic principles of engineering and physics, something that shouldn't work but somehow did anyway, like using a candy stick to power up alien technology. "Captain," Zara's voice crackled through the comm, "I'm detecting additional power buildups throughout the vessel. It appears to be running some kind of automated analysis protocols. Sarah moved to another crystal, this one larger than the others and pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. When she touched it, the images that flooded her mind were different. These weren't records of the past, but projections of the future. She saw humanity spreading across the galaxy, not through conquest or expansion, but through the same stubborn problem-solving that had activated this vessel. Humans adapting alien technology in ways its creators never intended. Human engineers looking at impossible challenges and saying, "Hold my beer," before finding solutions that made theoretical physicists weep. Humans taking technology designed by species millions of years more advanced and somehow making it work better through modifications that should have been catastrophic failures. The architects had searched for a species with the spark for millions of years before their transcendence. They had found dozens of candidates, each showing promise. But every one of them had eventually evolved beyond their capacity for irrational problem-solving. They became too advanced, too logical, too reasonable. Humans were different. Despite their technological advancement, despite their growing understanding of the universe, they maintained that essential spark of creative insanity. They still tried to fix precision instruments with percussive maintenance. They still attempted to solve complex engineering problems with whatever happened to be in their pockets. They still believed that if something was worth doing, it was worth doing with whatever you had on hand, even if what you had on hand was woefully inadequate for the task. "The universe needs engineers who think outside the box," Sarah said aloud, understanding flooding through her. "But more than that, it needs engineers who don't even acknowledge that the box exists." The chamber began to change around her. New passages opened, leading deeper into the vessel. More crystals activated, each one containing different aspects of architect technology. Faster-than-light travel that relied on convincing the universe that distance was just a suggestion. Energy generation systems that worked by politely asking matter to donate some of its mass to a good cause. Terraforming tools that operated on the principle that planets just needed a little encouragement to become more comfortable for life. None of it should have worked. All of it violated fundamental laws of physics. But it did work, because the architects had learned to build technology that operated on principles beyond pure logic. They had created devices that required the spark to function properly. Technology that needed an operator willing to try impossible things with inappropriate tools. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal holding a crystal larger than all the others. It pulsed with rainbow light that seemed to exist in colors Sarah couldn't name. She approached it slowly, sensing that this was the heart of the vessel's purpose. When she touched the crystal, she felt the presence of the architects themselves, not their physical forms. Those had been abandoned eons ago, but their consciousness, preserved within the crystalline matrix of their final gift to the universe. "Welcome, Spark-bearer," a voice said in her mind, speaking in concepts rather than words. "We have waited so long for your kind to find us. Will you accept the responsibility we offer?" Sarah understood what they were asking. The vessels weren't just repositories of knowledge. They were inheritance packages, left behind by a dying race for whatever species proved worthy of carrying on their work. The architects had transcended physical existence, but they couldn't take their technology with them. Someone had to maintain the vast mechanisms that kept reality stable, that prevented the universe from collapsing back into primordial chaos. Someone with the spark to make impossible things work when pure logic failed. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Sarah said aloud, knowing they would understand. The answer came not in words, but in images. Humans spreading across the galaxy, taking custody of architect technology, using their irrational problem-solving abilities to maintain and improve systems that kept stars burning, planets stable, and life thriving. Becoming the universe's maintenance crew, the cosmic engineers who fix things with whatever they happen to have handy. It was the most important job in existence, and it required exactly the kind of beings who would try to activate alien technology with a piece of candy. Sarah smiled. "When do we start?" The moment Sarah agreed, the vessel transformed around her. What had been a single chamber became a vast complex of interconnected spaces, each one dedicated to a different aspect of universal maintenance. The crystalline library expanded exponentially, revealing knowledge that made human science look like finger painting. But more than that, Sarah began to understand how it all connected. The architects hadn't just left behind technology. They had left behind a job opening, the position of universal maintenance engineer, a role that required someone capable of keeping impossible systems running through creative problem-solving and sheer bloody-minded determination. The kind of person who would look at a cosmic mechanism designed by beings millions of years more advanced and think, "I bet I could improve this with some duct tape and optimism." "Zara," Sarah said into her comm, "I need you to send a message to Earth. High priority, direct to the Colonial Administration." "What should the message say, Captain?" Sarah paused, trying to figure out how to explain that humanity had just been offered a job as the universe's handyman. "Tell them we've made contact with an extinct alien civilization, and they want to subcontract their infrastructure maintenance to us. Also, tell them to send more candy. We're going to need it." Through the crystalline matrix, Sarah could feel the architect's amusement at her response. They had observed thousands of species over millions of years, but none quite like humans. Other races, when faced with technology beyond their understanding, either worshipped it or tried to reverse engineer it through careful study. Humans looked at incomprehensible alien devices and started making modifications to see if they could make them run faster. The vessel began moving through space with purpose, its ancient drives carrying Sarah toward coordinates that had been programmed 2,000 years ago. As they traveled, more information flowed through the crystals. There were 9999 other vessels scattered throughout the galaxy, each one waiting for activation by a species with the spark. Most would never be found. Some would be discovered by species who lacked the necessary creativity to activate them. But a few, just a few, would find their way to beings capable of the kind of lateral thinking that turned candy into starship keys. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked the crystalline consciousness. "To the first of the maintenance stations," came the reply. "Your species will need training before taking full responsibility for universal infrastructure. We have built teaching facilities where you can learn to operate systems that exist partially outside normal spacetime." The idea should have been terrifying. Sarah was just a salvage operator from the outer colonies, and here she was being offered responsibility for maintaining the fundamental forces that kept reality stable. But instead of fear, she felt excitement. This was the ultimate engineering challenge, keeping a universe running with whatever tools you happen to have available. The maintenance station appeared on the vessel's view screens like something out of a fever dream. It was a structure the size of a small moon, but its geometry hurt to look at directly. Parts of it existed in folded space, while other sections seemed to phase in and out of reality entirely. It was a workshop built by beings who treated the laws of physics as helpful suggestions rather than absolute rules. As their vessel docked with the station, Sarah felt the presence of other architect consciousnesses awakening from millennial slumbers. These were the teachers, the ones who had volunteered to remain partially corporeal to train whatever species eventually proved worthy of inheriting their responsibility. "Welcome, Spark-bearer," they said in unison as Sarah stepped onto the station. "Are you ready to learn how to fix a universe?" The next several hours passed in a blur of impossible education. Sarah learned how to adjust the fundamental constants of physics using tools that looked suspiciously like oversized wrenches. She discovered that black holes were actually cosmic recycling centers that occasionally needed their filters changed. She found out that dark matter was just regular matter that had gotten shy and needed encouragement to participate in normal interactions. Most importantly, she learned that the universe was much more robust than anyone had suspected. It could handle quite a bit of creative maintenance as long as the person doing the work approached it with the right attitude. The wrong attitude involved things like careful analysis and following established procedures. The right attitude involved phrases like, "Let's see what happens if I do this," and "I'm sure it'll be fine." Your species has exactly the right combination of technical competence and cavalier disregard for safety protocols, one of the teacher architects explained. You understand technology well enough to operate it, but not so well that you're afraid to make improvements. Sarah thought about every human engineer she'd ever known, all of them united by the belief that any system could be made better with sufficient application of creativity and mild violence. Yeah, that sounds like us. As her training progressed, Sarah began to understand the true scope of what humanity was being offered. The architects had spent millions of years building and maintaining a vast infrastructure that kept the universe stable, star-lifting engines that prevented supernovas, quantum stabilizers that kept reality from fracturing into parallel dimensions, temporal regulators that ensured causality flowed in the right direction most of the time. All of it needed constant attention from beings willing to hit it with hammers when it made funny noises. "There is one final test," the teacher architects told her as her education neared completion. "You must demonstrate that your species can handle the responsibility we offer." They led her to the station's core, where a massive mechanism hummed with barely contained cosmic forces. It was the universe's master reset switch, designed to restart everything from scratch if reality became too badly damaged to repair. For 2 million years, it had been showing warning signs that it needed maintenance. "The problem is simple," the architects explained. "One of the primary stabilization crystals has developed a harmonic resonance that threatens the entire system's stability. Our calculations show that any attempt to repair it conventionally will result in catastrophic cascade failure." Sarah studied the mechanism, her newly educated eyes taking in its impossible complexity. She could see the problem immediately. A crystal the size of a house that was vibrating at exactly the wrong frequency. The architect's solution would have involved careful recalibration using precise harmonic dampeners and weeks of delicate adjustment. Sarah's solution was different. She walked over to the maintenance locker that every architect facility seemed to have, grabbed what looked like a cosmic-scale rubber mallet, and gave the crystal one solid whack. The harmonic resonance stopped immediately. "Perfect," the architects said, and Sarah could feel their deep satisfaction. "Your species will do very well in this role. You understand that sometimes the best solution to a complex problem is a simple one applied with confidence." Over the following months, more humans arrived at the maintenance station. Engineers and technicians from across human space, all of them sharing the same fundamental approach to problem solving. If it's broken, hit it with something until it works again, and if that doesn't work, try a different something. They took to universal maintenance like ducks to water. Within a year, human teams were scattered throughout the galaxy, keeping cosmic infrastructure running through a combination of technical skill and cheerful disregard for manufacturers' warranties. They improved architect technology in ways its creators had never imagined, usually by treating complex quantum mechanisms like they were particularly stubborn combustion engines. Sarah became the first director of Universal Maintenance, a title she wore with pride despite its cosmic scope. She established the Human Engineering Corps, an organization dedicated to the principle that any problem could be solved if you approached it with the right tools and the wrong attitude. The universe had found its maintenance crew, and they came armed with candy, duct tape, and an unshakable belief that anything worth doing was worth doing with whatever you happened to have in your pockets. The architects, in their transcendent state, watched humanity take over the care and feeding of reality itself. They had waited 2 million years for beings stubborn enough to fix the universe with inappropriate tools and blind optimism. It had been worth the wait. Deep in the cosmic infrastructure that kept stars burning and time flowing in the right direction, warning lights that had been blinking red for millennia finally turned green. The universe was in good hands, hands that weren't afraid to give it a good whack when it started making funny noises. And in the maintenance logs that would be passed down through generations of human engineers, the first entry remained unchanged. Problem solved with candy stick. Universe operational, will monitor for unusual noises. Some solutions were elegant in their complexity. Others were perfect in their simplicity. Humanity had always specialized in the latter.